We are still seeing headlines about talks. Ruto maintains tough conditions ahead of talks. President yesterday said he's ready for dialogue with the opposition, but he will not be blackmailed using violence, and that power sharing is off the table, as his henchmen also ruled out talks on cost of living. This is what we're hearing from the top political leadership in the country, from both sides. What do the people want? The citizens themselves. Cyprian Nyamwamu is the director, Future of Kenya Foundation. He's our next guest. Good morning, Cyprian.
Good morning, Eric. Good morning, Du. Happy to be here this morning again.
Karibu sana. The hot seat of the situation room. We want to have a conversation. What do the citizens want ahead of these Kenya Kwanza Azimio talks, ahead of our national talks? That's the conversation we'll be having. To welcome you, let me give you the day's proverb. Acting on behalf of CT Muga, the proverbs are from West Africa, those countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso.
Where there's a lot of action.
Where there's a lot of action. And the proverb today is, salt cannot glorify itself in the sauce. Salt cannot glorify or praise itself in the sauce. What's your interpretation of it?
So it can glorify itself where? However, I think it's when you reflect on salt glorifying itself, it's about where a human being can praise himself or herself. It has to be a way, or it has to be in a context where it is appreciating its source, that I came from this people, this ethnic community, this nation, or more importantly, to acknowledge, like if you are in power, that your source of power is part of the donation from the sovereign. So that is what I take from that.
The source here, by the way, I meant SAUCE. Not SOUR.
Yes.
CE.
CE as well. Yeah. Yeah, it's because I think then because the source can
haijisifu ndani ya mchuzi.
Yes, because it dissolves there and it is part of the source. So you should act as part of the community, as part of the commonwealth, as part of the collective beauty of a people or of a community or of a work team.
No matter your talent.
No matter your talent. Yes.
Interesting.
You are only a contributor to the collective commonwealth.
That's a good one. That's a good view of it. So we've been seeing this conversation about, talks, dialogue. What's your view of it? First of all, by the political leadership saying, okay, let's have dialogue. What do you make of that?
They haven't said that they want to have dialogue at all. They have never said that.
What have they said?
The first time President Ruto suggested the need for bipartisan talks was on Palm Sunday, April the 9th, this year. And it was after the series of demonstrations of Maandamano. So it is not that he wanted talks. He wanted to see what he can do to get the demonstrations off the street, because they were affecting the economy, and the government had quantified it at about 3 billion shillings a day. In an economy like this, the president was acting in self-preservation. He didn't intend that there be talks, and the talks collapsed, as you saw. After the latest installment of Maandamano that Azimio called the third wave, it became painful because more than 34 people lost their lives, police officers, many injuries, ethnic clashes were out there, the economy was tanking. And I think that is why it was suggested that there is need for some form of talks to try and cool down the pressure. So it is not the political class that has said they want talks. even as late as yesterday, the president's side, Kenya Kwanza, is saying they will not go to the talks under conditions, they will not be pressured, they will not discuss certain things. So you can already see that those are talks that are perished, that are doomed. They may not even take off to begin with.
But they have said that they want talks. Because you started by premising this and saying that they have not said they want talks. They have called for
They have
talks.
been forced by conditions to hold talks, which they have not even agreed what kind of talks they are going to have. The first meeting is tomorrow at Bomas of Kenya by the teams that have been selected by both sides of the political divide. But this morning, what I think is important is to say that these are what we call the intra-elite negotiations. They are not talks about Kenya. They are not talks about the real issues that should be on the table. In the rest of the sectors, which are not in parliament, have been having a conversation since 2017 about what this country requires if we are going to avoid these clashes at every election and these clashes that follow every election. And the government side, whether it was under Uhuru or Raila or anybody else, don't want structured talks that are inclusive, that follow the principles of genuine dialogue. In fact, they have said they don't want dialogue. What they want is some conversation, some talk, some negotiations. So the vision that the people of Kenya have is not in agreement with the idea that the political class has.
Can we get from your point of view?
Yes.
What is this vision that Kenya has? And I'm going to maybe just add a little bit of meat to that question.
Yeah.
Is that I am of the belief that if a citizenry, it doesn't matter where on the planet they are domiciled, a citizenry who for certain things are met, they actually really don't bother with what government does. Look at the United States, look at the UK, look at Singapore, look at China. Once certain things are sorted out for you, you really leave the business of governance to those who have either asked you to give it to them by way of election or those who've gotten it by appointment. The problem comes about when those things are not being met. That's the way I see it. And we can see that if you look at Social Security being set up in the United States, for example, people's daily needs are met. Do whatever you want in the White House, essentially. From where you sit, what is it that Kenyans want? And have they even said, wait a minute, in all of this, can we be part of the conversation?
Kenyans have been very clear from 2017 at least. I can give a very good account of the position that Kenyans have taken through their, I can account for about 9 sectors. I'm talking about KEPSA and the private sector broadly through what they call Mkenya Daima. I'm talking about the religious leadership through what they call the Dialogue Reference Group. I'm talking about civil society through their structured engagement. I'm talking about students and the youth movement. They have what we call the National Youth Serving Organizations. If the women's movement under their National Steering Committee, if I can talk about those 9 sectors that I have, the trade unions that were on the streets, a month and a half ago, they have a very clear understanding of the kind of national dialogue that they want. And they are saying that you have to go back to 2008 to read the report of Kofi Annan in what we call Agenda 4 items. What has happened for the last 60 years since we got our independence is that there are issues that the political class has ensured will never be discussed conclusively. They have been listed in all reports, but they will not be discussed. They will not be discussed because the people in power are accused to be the architects of the problems. So if you go to the Kofi Annan Agenda 4 issues, for example, land reform, historical injustices, regional imbalances, ethnic animosity, etc., those issues can, the current leadership, whether they're in the opposition or they are in government, generally do not want a national conversation about those issues. So they create very limited number of pressing issues like constituting IBC and a little other things. And they say, this is what we all need. Once we discuss this, we are okay. So you see, when they agreed under the former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, the government side said, you must drop the cost of living from that list. Because that's a policy issue and we'll deal with it at the ministries. And it's clear that the Azimio side dropped the issue, except that when they came out to speak to the public, the backlash was so big, they started issuing statements and saying, no, we need to revise this list and put cost of living on it. They were not intending to discuss it.
So again, is there any way that we can concretize and say that this is what the citizens want?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. The 10 issues that have been framed by those 9 sectors are widely circulated. In fact, there's a letter that
But those
I know.
sectors have not sat together,
They have sat.
have they?
Last 2 weeks ago at Fungamano, the 9 sectors met under the aegis of what we call the National Dialogue Forum. And they published a list of 10 issues that they want settled once and for all at a State of the Nation convention, where they say government must be invited, the opposition must be a participant, but they must be participants like all of us. The question that the private sector, for example, asked at Fungamano on that day is this: if Azimio and Kenya Kwanza meet to talk about the economy and the cost of living, what are they going to submit there? Azimio will be giving whose views at that particular meeting. The private sector needs to come there and say the cost of energy, the cost of money, interest rates, and the following things are the ones that are making the economy not to grow. That's why we are retrenching people. So you cannot talk about two political sides who are squibbling over how IBC is supposed to be formed, as if IBC is not a referee for the people of Kenya.
Yeah.
They make IBC look like a referee
For the
two of them.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the construction of all these talks that are going on. The Kenyans let them have those talks sometimes, because even if limited as they are, but now after 60 years, it is clear that these guys will never discuss anything that is going to solve the problem, the fundamental socioeconomic and political problems of our country. That's why the list of 10 issues is very clear, and we are saying we are not hoping for any charity or
Goodwill,
or contribution or mercy from somebody, whether it is in government or in the. We are saying this is our country. Article 1 of our Constitution gives us sovereign power. We can exercise it through elected representatives, or we can exercise it directly, so that we give our country the direction we want to give it.
Cyprian, I think this all, all of this came from somewhere, and maybe we can take a step back and ask then the question, what is the problem? Because usually when we talk about there are talks and they've come about as a result of something having gone wrong, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you call the village elders will now, mediate between this side, and then what happened? What is the issue here? Because suddenly everybody wants to talk, isn't it? We're saying Kenya has issues, but all of this, suddenly we realize that this conversation needed to happen after the election of 2022.
No, the elections need to have happened at least in 2017.
No. These two sides that are talking today,
Yes.
they would not be in the same conversation void of the election that happened in 2022. An election happened in 2022. Somebody was not happy with the results, right? We are having bipartisan talks today, and the reasons have morphed from one to another. It was essentially IEBC must open the service. It then became that we must have a conversation about the cost of living. All of this stemming from the election of 2022. I can agree that there were deep-seated issues before that, of those that you have mentioned now, Agenda 4, and I said all of those have been historical. They've been there from one administration to the next. But in this conversation that we're having today,
yes,
what's the problem?
there are two types of talks, and I want to answer the question very specifically. They are what we call intra-elite talks, which are normally for the elite, whether they're in the opposition, to agree on how to accommodate each other. Because elections are expensive, and if you are Raila, for example, and you've run 3 elections, presidential elections, without being in government, the other side has an advantage over you, over money, structure, and everything else. So you are feeling the pressure. There are no more donors coming forward to fund your elections. And so intra-elite talks have their place in our country. And they cannot happen unless the opposition raises the ante, which is to say the elections were rigged, we have evidence, you are in office illegitimately, and we want the servers opened, and we want all that. You understand? The Supreme Court didn't determine the matters based on law and facts, and IBC was compromised and it was captured and whatnot. All those issues. Those are the issues we say the chips. You have to raise the stakes if the talks are going to happen.
Right.
Once the talks are opened, the discussion, I can tell you, I'm privy to a lot of information there. People are saying, how do we divide the 7 commissioners? Who gets the 3 and who gets the other ones? How do we get the chairman and that kind of thing? That's why I was asking the question. So these referees for MPs is for political parties.
Exactly. So then the question.
So that is why those talks are actually against the broad long-term interests of our country. We are actually saying that the problem has never been IBC in elections in this country.
Never.
It has never been. The problem in our country is the choice of the presidential system of government and the choice of an electoral system that we call the winner takes it all, first past the post. So our structural problems cannot be solved by sharing IBC commissioners.
So these talks that we have today,
Yes.
we can solidly say has absolutely nothing to do with Kenyans and their desires.
They have nothing to do with Kenyans and their desires. And you look at the list of the things that have been presented there, there are issues there. For example, the poaching of members of parliament from the opposition, grabbing Jubilee from
Azimio.
Kenyatta, Azimio, and those are all legitimate, multi-party democracy concerns, right? But we are saying that we have fundamental constitutional issues about our country that will never be allowed to be discussed on that table. It's only us, the people of Kenya, who can discuss and agree and compel government to take action on those issues. Let me just give you an example. More than 34 people have been killed by the police. Why were they killed? Who killed them? People were pulled out of their houses and killed and maimed. Why is that happening? Why is state terrorism happening in a country that is at peace? Why is this being done? That level of human rights violations cannot be left to politicians to talk about. We must open the conversation so that Kenyans ask themselves, is this how we want to live? So that when we come from a certain community and we have not agreed with your government, we didn't vote for you, you can send people to come and pull us out of our houses and kill us? We can't live like that. That is not the Kenya that we established in 2010 under the Constitution of Kenya. I'm just giving you some of the issues that are never going to be on that table. And that's why we are saying they can start to have their intra-elite because they are free. Kenyans are free to meet and talk. We can't say, no, they must not meet. We are going to bomb us tomorrow to stop them from meeting. We can't do that. It's a democracy. If Ruto or Raila or anybody wants to meet with anybody and talk about anything and agree on anything, you can't stop them so long as they are exercising their constitutional right and duty. However, we are saying those talks have nothing about the concrete issues that are on the table and that we have published. In fact, there is a clear memorandum that we've written on behalf of the citizens of Kenya under what we call Kenya Bora Tuitakayo, and those 10 issues are part of what we want the national dialogue process, what we call the multi-stakeholder national dialogue process, to discuss so that it's foolish to repeat this ritual after every election. We know there is somebody who's going to be aggrieved with the results of an election. So then we kill each other and we wait for another 5 years and we kill each other. I mean, that is foolishness and we must avoid it. So why can't we have an honest conversation about who we are, what are our problems, political, economic, social, and agree that this is how we want to solve these problems with government or without government. A lot of these issues do not even need government.
Cyprian, what you're saying today is something we've said many times on this show. Even when the conversations around the BBI began, we said Kenya is due for another Bomas moment, where every sector in the country comes to Bomas and we have a constituent assembly and we talk about, all right, it's been 10 years of this thing. How's it working? Where are we as a country? What do we need to do? Now, you're saying it's the same kind of conversation that the 9 sectors are saying, National Dialogue Forum, let's have a national dialogue. But then who's involved in this? When you say the National Dialogue Forum, how many sectors, how widely representative is this National Dialogue Forum?
Thank you very much, Eric. Actually, the 9 are the vanguard, the movers of the dialogue process. These are sectors that have what you call convening power. When you talk about the religious sector, they have convening power. But the real idea is to get a national convention of about 2,000 delegates who have a stake, real stake. In that kind of a conversation, you will expect that the judiciary will have to be represented, parliament will have to be represented in some way. You will expect that the council of governors will be represented, the commissions and independent officers. And political parties, you expect them to participate. But we also expect that sectors like young people, you cannot continue to claim that you represent young people. You need them on the table. Students in this country need to come and speak about how they are interacting with education. And so it's about 22 sectors that we have listed that need representation. That kind of a representation is a representation you draft into some kind of a framework and you convene. Now, our expectation is that Kenya Kwanza and Azimio are not going to be enthusiastic about this kind of a national convention. And I've told you the reason. The reason is that they are the accused. They are the perpetrators of crimes against Kenyans. All right? So you cannot ask Azimio or ODM, how do you think party primaries can be improved in Kenya. Do you see what I'm talking about? These people do not have the solutions because they are the perpetrators. Yeah. You understand?
Yeah.
I remember in 2013 when the late Ambassador Bethwell Kiplagat and his team presented the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission report, very voluminous. I audited that process. The recommendations were very strong. But you see, when you are Uhuru Kenyatta and you open that report and you see the Kenyatas are accused in about 16 pages, you shelve and throw it under the table.
Of course.
William Ruto is in that, like in 18 pages of the TJS report. He will never implement it. So we don't expect a lot from these gentlemen and ladies.
And that's why
that is why now, for us, we know what we've done before. You remember during the NCEC days?
Yep.
We didn't request KANU to bring us together. We convened the people of Kenya in Limuru. And all the sectors came, including political parties in the opposition. It was only KANU which didn't come.
You see, now that's the thing.
Yes.
For then, the civil society movement, starting with the Fungamano and the religious leaders, I mean, NCCK, and then the forces of Kivuta Kibwana, the NCEC, you are part of this conversation. There was some representation of the political players. The political players played a role in moving this. And that's why even when Moi was saying, listen, this is a Wanjiku thing. Wanjiku doesn't need, we can do it. There was another voice. When Moi said, I'm appointing Yashpal Guy from the commission, Yashpal Guy heard the voices from elsewhere, which were also inside Parliament, which were saying, we cannot ignore this other parallel process that's going on. Now, we have a parallel process, or I'm hearing you saying the National Dialogue Forum is creating a parallel process for conversation, a national conversation. The political elite are in one bus this time. We do not have a split, right? So how then? You see, that time there was the advantage of the opposition coming in and saying, you know what, we don't agree with those guys. We feel that we are better with you guys. This time, if you look at the headlines, you will only see what we are seeing
what
is the politicians.
do we miss? You see, we don't miss anything. Let me tell you something that I learned in my university political science classes. Politicians are like fish. They can't survive where the people are not. They can't survive outside the people. That's why President William Ruto has to quickly run to Mashinani and stand on top of the SUV. That is the life of a politician.
You need that dose to keep going.
Without it, a politician is nothing. Even the reason why they are on the table is their claim that they are representing the people. That's why they are on the table. The day the National Dialogue Convention is convened, because we have our constitutional rights. That's the conversation that is going on. And we are not being loud about it because we don't need anybody's permission to convene. We also have the resources. We have the expertise, and we have the constitutional framework for conducting that kind of a convention. So we are not missing anything. The day we convene it, they will plead. You will see everybody issuing a statement and saying, these are the issues that I think should be on that table. This is our position. They will send their secretary generals. Malala has come here many times. He will run in with the Kenya Kwanza position. We are not worried about them. We know how this country works. And we do know that the day the convention is called, the National Dialogue Convention, the government side will run there quickly. And the opposition side, Azimio, will rush. They will not even allow you to announce the date before they say, we are also part of it. So we are not worried at all about their not. In fact, if you spoke to Azimio people, they will tell you, if we do not convene this convention, they are not going to get anything on that table. Ruto is not going to give these guys anything. I can tell you that. I've taught, I've trained, I know how mediation is done, I know how negotiations are done. Azimio has nothing.
They have no leverage.
They have no leverage, absolutely no leverage. So I don't expect that these talks are even going to take off.
You see, the other fear, and I'd like you to address this, is what we've seen before. Civic actors being very good at mobilizing and pushing a certain agenda and elevating it to be the national agenda, and even pushing for the political class to stop and listen. And then civic actors, by the mere fact that the political actors have stopped and listened, they begin celebrating the civic actors, and they leave this. And that's when the political actors swoop in and take over. We saw it the Arab Spring. We've seen it in Sudan, in Lebanon. We've seen it in the Far East Asian countries. We have seen it everywhere. Even in Kenya, the 2010 constitution was a moment of civic actors sitting down and clapping and saying, yes, we have had
Hosanna.
And we have seen what we have done. What has happened in the last 13 years? How do we safeguard this time?
You are actually spot on, to be very honest. There was this, triumphalism. We've succeeded, we've delivered, we now have a new constitution. We thought that now the new constitution is going to implement itself. Look who got the power. Are the people who didn't want the constitution. So this is something that we've learned painfully. So, because everybody went to take care of their businesses now that we had delivered the constitution in 2010. Well, we've learned our lessons, and they have been very bitter lessons. That is why we are coming together. The citizen side under Kenya Bora Tuitakayo Assembly, in the religious leaders organizing on their own, the private sector, etc. Because once the confluence of the legitimate forces and sectors of our people come together, it is because we know that if we don't stay together and do vigilance, there is no implementation that is going to happen. So that is one thing. The second and last thing that we've learned from about 20 years of this kind of process is that you must establish, like what we established in Zimbabwe, a national agency of non-state representatives. Our vision is that at the end of the national dialogue process, we are going to establish the JOMEC, the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, where you have about 11 commissioners from the private sector, civil society, religious, persons with disability, like that, which conducts a continuous process of monitoring and tracking to see whether we are implementing, because that's what we didn't have in 2008 when we did the Kofi Annan. So there was this big report with the Agenda 4 issues that need to be done, but there was nobody who was following up. And Parliament and the state did not have any appetite to address those issues because they were going to affect the interests. Human beings look at the interests, and they said, if we implement Agenda 4, we are removed. We are basically damned. So that is why the WAC report, the Kriegler report, the TGRC report, all those reports, even Chapter 6 of our current constitution, has been observed in breach. And there's nothing that is going on. So there's state capture, there are a lot of problems, and these problems cannot be addressed by the people in power, or the elite, as we call them. So we are very conscious of that, and the admission we make is that we actually lost our steps after the promulgation of the Constitution. And we are coming to 13 years this August.
You said something about to check and see, monitor, evaluate whether these things are actually being done, right? So then what happens if they're not? And then what power then is vested to say, look, this is who must? Yesterday we had a conversation and really worried about the fact that, as you say, members of parliament captured by whomever, and they could be captured by their own selfish interest, the executive, whomever, really, unfortunately, are not in a position to do some of these things. So then what? We find out that these things are not being implemented. This is the will of the people. Those who've been given the legislative mandate to do this are not doing it. Then what? And I think that's the place where we are most worried.
We are not too worried now because we have a constitution that I think the people in power have not read very well, and that's very good because a lot of the things that the Ruto administration did during the Mandamano, they do not know what's coming. That I can assure you. And we are not boasting too much, Eric, but Kenya has things that are not in many other countries.
True.
And the documentation that is going on, the evidence that is being gathered from the victims, from the families who lost whatever, from the businesses that were broken and all that kind of thing, being done quietly by various actors, they are going to bite somebody. They are going to bite somebody.
It's not if, it's when.
It is when. Somebody is going to be beaten very harsh, very hard. There is a current explanation, a discussion going on. What is the meaning of collecting 10 million, 15 million signatures under chapter 1 of our constitution? The government has not even started to interact with that conversation because they are already campaigning for 2027. And so I don't know whether I'm letting out information, but I don't think that this government are serious people.
Is it just the government or is it the political elite? Again, to me, government cross over one side to the other side.
Uru's administration had... we are in civil society. We are very competent people. But that side had very accomplished expertise available to that administration. So
did the administration act on the advice?
No. They used the expertise to actually undermine the public interest. But now it's going to catch up with Uru as well. And I think I can say that here. You know, one of the things that happened and that's agenda number 2 in our 10-point agenda. I'm now starting to unpack a part of that even as time moves. The forensic audit of public debt. Parliament is never going to do it.
No.
And it is possible that under the 10 years of William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta, government may have borrowed upwards of 6 trillion shillings without parliamentary approval. That's treason. What are you going to do? Somebody has to answer. And who is that? That is going to be President Uhuru.
But my question is...
Yes.
Somebody has to answer. It's going to be President Uhuru. Who is going to ask the question for him to answer? And that is my... who's going to take responsibility?
No, exactly. I don't know whether you realize...
No. Because we've said...
Bailing the cat, we are going to bail.
We've said Parliament is a lame duck. That's not going to happen.
It's captured completely.
Civil society is asking the questions and pushing, right? It's very simple here. Who is the one? What is the entity that it's going to... Is there some ad hoc court somewhere that's waiting in the shadows, waiting for it to come out and then say, we have then the leadership or governmental mandate to then come out and ask these questions? Is there a court hanging in the shadows somewhere to come and ask the questions? No. Who is going to make the case? Because you've said that everybody's hands are soiled already. Everybody who is in this conversation has dirty hands.
In the intra-elite.
Exactly.
In the intra-elite.
And they also...
And that's why we are not looking up to them for solutions.
Enough, they are right now the ones who hold the instruments of power.
Well,
who is going to ask the question? And we're saying Uhuru Kenyatta will answer. Who is asking him? We're saying William Ruto will answer. Who is asking him? We're saying people who borrowed will answer. Who is asking them? Who's going to ask?
I don't know whether you remember that there's a year when Uhuru was president, a certain lady from Korea, she was the Korean president, South Korea president, came here and 9 months she had gone back to Korea and she was in jail.
Yes.
This constitution has not even been implemented a part of it. I mean, we are probably at maybe 7-10% of implementing this constitution. This constitution, once the people come together under the national dialogue process and resolutions are going to be made, and the implementation mechanisms are going to be in the matrix, you are going to see a certain solidarity amongst the people of Kenya from all the 47 counties and even those who are in the diaspora. You are going to see certain tremendous actions. And that's why I'm asking whether the Ruto administration understands what they are doing. Because they are operating. I saw the president saying that the only job he's left with now is to take Raila to Bondo. I said, does the president understand the country that he is governing? Because if he knew, then he would not be saying certain things like those. Because a lot is coming. And the people of Kenya, I trust them. I went to jail all the way to committee and we didn't die. We came out. I'm here. I'm alive. We have done these things and we will do them again. We are a different kind of a citizenry. Our heritage from Mau Mau and our heritage from the first and second liberations have taught us the things that we need to know. We also know about the kind of constituency we are now dealing with. So all the issues that we have put on the table, from dealing with the issues of historical injustices, dealing with the cost of living, the taxation policy, talking about service delivery, which is about, I think, issue number 5. Service delivery in this country. Take passports, for example, and how we've just collapsed with the issuance of passports in this country. NHIF has collapsed. The healthcare sector is in a mess. The education sector is completely in shambles. Look at higher education funding, for example. So the issues are very clear. And if government knew what the citizens are talking about, they will in fact abandon Raila and start to talk to the religious leaders and the private sector, because they are actually talking to the wrong guys. Because the demand is going to be big and the results are going to be demanded for. Once we establish the JOMEC and we'll be giving this country, we are going to see 3, 4, 5 million people assembling and saying, you can't govern us if you are not part of the social contract. The social contract is so clear. So those Kenyans you said are okay if certain things are being provided. They also look up to the elite. I've seen what civil society can lead citizens to do, what the religious sector can do under, for example, the People's Commission at Fungamano. So I'm confident that Kenya is going to reinvent itself and these demands are going to be met.
You know, Cyprian, I admire, the zeal with which you're speaking.
The confidence,
the conviction that you have inside you that these things can happen.
Because we've done them.
Reality.
Yeah.
Previously, you have had the support of, let's say, donors. How you get the money to mobilize all these things. This time, is it the same as, do you have the same access to donor funding as you had 30 years ago? Do you have the same access to mobilization of resources as you had, let's say, yes, 20 years ago? Do you?
In fact, that's the opportunity that is there now. Because let me tell you, because I worked in that space for as long as you know I have, one of the problems with donor money is that you cannot act as you desire to act. I'll give you one example, just one. We are at Bomas. We have drafted the constitution. It has gone to the referendum. It has collapsed. We've gone to Naivasha 2010. We've drafted a new proposed constitution. And one of our biggest funders, I am not going to name them on air, reads the constitution and says we've cut the leases on land from 900 years to 99. You know what that means? The leases are over.
Yep.
Because they have been having the land for 75 years.
Yes.
So 99 means another 14 years.
Yep.
And the land is gone. The first thing they did is to withdraw
Their support.
funding for the committee of experts and the constitutional conference and the referendum. There we are. So we realize that we actually don't have the money to even print copies of the proposed constitution. I am happy that we are starting this journey this time round, not looking to some donors to be the ones who are going to fund this process. We have operated, for example, under Kenya Bora Tutakayo for over the last 5 months from self-funding. We've conducted, I think, 4 workshops. We've done about meetings across the country, and it has been self-funded. People contributing 4,000, 3,000, 6,000, 10,000, those who are in better places, 20,000, and we raise the budget. And we train people, we have conversations, we agree, we establish structures. This is the way to go. You cannot liberate yourself from money that is being told, if it goes against IMF, stop that funding. So I'm very happy. We've spoken to a few
So now
donors
there's
of
true
callers.
independence.
We are independent.
Okay.
And this is why we are relying on citizens to stand on their own and act on their own. And I like where we are as a country
Okay.
going forward.
Cyprian, thank you very much for joining us today. Someone says you still didn't answer the question of who will bell the cat. You said civil society.
We will bell the cat. Kenya Bora Tutakayo assemblies, working with our allies in the religious, in the business, in the, in the youth and in the community sector, we are going to bell the cat.
Cyprian Nyamwamu, Director, Future of Kenya Foundation.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.